We'll see some tips that will help us to work specifically on placing luminaires when we talk about the ceiling. We must take into account some factors, especially when working in a coordinated way. The best way to place luminaires in ceiling is using a face hosting. We can go to Systems, Electrical, and Lighting fixture. Here we are placing a luminaire that can be part of the ceiling. In this case, the luminaire is not placed specifically on the ceiling category, but it is placed on one side, and we know that it is placed on one side for what it says down here. Click on Host Face to place instance. They can be placed on any face that exists in our model. Talking about the geometrical point of view. By default, value is placed on the vertical face. We'll try to place a luminaire and observe that only recognizes the walls, doors, or the edges of the ceiling, but trying to put it in here, it doesn't recognize it. To place it on one side in general, which may even be inclined, we must make use of this tool, Place on Face, not only vertical face, a face in general. Obviously, this family will have an insertion point, and we can use the ceiling grids for placement by clicking and place it. There is also another option to place it on a work plane, but we'll see it later. Another thing to consider is that perhaps when we are working with a ceiling, it may be that the architect has placed previous luminaires before we started with electrical design. Such luminaires, as mentioned before, can serve to know how the ceiling will look at the end. Maybe that's what the architect wants to see, but if the architect places the luminaires directly on the ceiling, he will generate a hole. When we place a luminaire, no hole has been generated in the ceiling because we're working on a link. We connect architecture externally. But when the luminaire is placed directly on the ceiling element of the architectural model itself, we'll generate a hole, and when we try to place the luminaire, in the case of the lighting project, we'll find the space unusable. We cannot place luminaires because the ceiling has a hole made by the previous luminaire placed by the architect. These are the kind of details that we should coordinate to avoid problems in the future. Now that we have placed the first luminaire, we have several options for placing copies. Obviously, we could access using the copy tool or simply pressing CO, and it will copy the element. It will ask that we click on a point of reference, and we can make the next copy. Another option will be to select the item, right-click and create a similar. That gives us the advantage of reselecting options. For example, put only a vertical face. Place on a face or on a work plane. Depending on what we need, we can copy it. Another option that we could use is that after creating the line, to ensure that the separation using copy is always the same, we can use this reference point. Activate the copy multiple option to do it repeatedly and thus finish the line. Always with the same separation. Another good practice is to use the alignment tool. It may be that this is moved up a little. We use the alignment tool, AL, and align this face with this one, so we can verify that the relative distance are correct. This is especially useful when we make the creation of conduits or junction boxes and so on. It will be easier if it is aligned. It will also be more realistic. Obviously, we could select this for and create lower copies. Go to Reference, point to the next, and the next, OK. What other tips we must take into account when working with luminaires? It may be the case that the ceilings are inclined. This is quite common in auditoriums, atriums, etc. When the luminaire is tilted, the symbol will not be seen. Note that at this moment it is a typical symbol, to be crossed by a line that it is diagonal inside the rectangle. But if we go to a 3D view, the diagonal line does not really exist. We can select the item and it is simply a box that includes ballast and everything. Note that the line does not exist. The result is that in this view we're seeing a symbol, and symbols are only seen when the view is perpendicular to the plane of position of the symbol, as we are seeing right front in a horizontal plane where we can see it. I will create in an elevation view a new reference plane. Go to Architecture, Reference Plane, and I'll create an inclined plane close to where the luminaires were placed. We'll do it from right to left. When we make the reference planes from right to left, the luminaires will look from top down. If we make the click left to right, they'll be looking up, and that's not realistic. So we always do it from right to left. Thus, the luminaire will be pointing down. That's the idea. We can give a name to the reference plane. We'll name it Example Plane. I don't want to be very specific, and now I will return to the ceiling view, and here at this point, observe that I can create a similar on a reference plane. And now I choose the name of the plane. It is this that I just created, Example. See that I am placing the luminaire in the example plane, but see also that the visual of the luminaire is not the same as the ones that were placed in a perpendicular plane to our view. What can we do in these cases? Maybe we can create a special notation to indicate that this is an inclined luminaire. Or we could create a model line. Go to Annotate and create a detail line or model and add it directly on the plane. We must specify that it is lighting, electricity, so that this line of detail is properly identified and what it is being used for. But it is something that we must consider, that perhaps you will have a different visual and they are exactly the same elements. The only thing that has changed is the position of the element. Another thing to consider is that sometimes changes are made to the ceiling. It could be the case that some of these ceilings change extension, and that will generate an alert for us. To give you an example, I will select it and I will take it out. See that says Instance Origin does not lie on host face. So it remains at the same height that was placed, but now it is not associated with the ceiling. If the ceiling height is changed, the luminaire won't change. We must make sure that when there is a ceiling change, the elements are not displaced. If the ceiling height changes, the light will change height with him, but on an horizontal movement it will depend. In this case, you can see that the ceiling was created using a sketch. If these sketch lines move individually and end outside, we won't be able to change it. Now, if it is moved totally, there won't be any problem. Such situations have to be taken into account. Another problem we might have, we will go back and erase this one here. That we will have is that sometimes in the early stages, The original ceiling that we are using as a reference for aligning design may be deleted and a new one is created. Simply what the architect does is delete the old and create a new one. That will create a hosting problem for us. What should we do then? If there is none, that is, the original host is not recognized because it was created a new one, even if it has the same height, we must select the luminaire and click the button that says Pick New or choose a new work plane. When we click here, we have the same three original placement options and we can select the new face and place it where we want. If the ceiling has been deleted, we have to do it this way. A good practice is to talk to the original architect and tell him that, as far as possible, it's best not to create new ones, but to edit existing ones if possible. Sometimes the family changes so much that it is best to delete it and start again. But in that case, it is good to receive a notification, something that can help us on, especially in the early stages of the project. Because in the early stages, the ceiling heights and their shapes and configuration change so much. A good practice will be that instead of using the ceiling planes for hosts or for elements, instead we go to an elevation view and we create our own planes. That is to say, I delete here. Let's create in architecture reference planes and use those reference planes in the early stages of the development. Remember the reference plane so that the luminaire sits down must be created from right to left. I will type here dining room ceiling. For example, instead of using the plane as such of the ceiling, we could use this reference plane. If there is a ceiling movement, if deleted or copied, it won't affect our luminaire's project. We should only be aware of changing the height of a reference plane. And once the design process has stabilized, because there comes a time when these changes are no longer necessary, we could come back here where it says entry level or hosting view and change the host of this. We had them placed on a work plane. We can choose the work plane by clicking here, but after that it has changed, say we place here. And it changed our project and there is no much change in the ceiling. We click again and we place them on a face. This is the most expeditious way to do it. This is the easiest way. We use first reference place in the early stages and then do the development. We'll move it a bit so that it is well placed. Here are some things you should consider and hopefully helps you in the good practice for creating